the harsh winter of 1875 Montana, Sarah Collins and her two young children barely survived on their crumbling homestead. Then, one stormy evening, fate delivered a dying stranger to their door. A well-dressed cowboy, bleeding heavily from what looked like bullet wounds. Despite having barely enough food for themselves, Sarah couldn't turn away a soul in need. She dragged him inside, tended his wounds with precious herbs from her garden, and shared their last bowl of stew. Little did this struggling widow know that her act of kindness would transform not just the mysterious stranger's life, but the destiny of her entire family. What secret was this wounded cowboy carrying that would change everything for the poor widow who saved him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Collins knelt before the weathered family Bible, her trembling fingers tracing the familiar entries, birth records, marriage dates, and now her throat tightened. Her William's death certificate, the ink barely dry from 4 months ago. The leather binding was cracked and worn, just like everything else on their struggling homestead. She closed the Bible gently and tucked it away in the cedar chest William had made during their first year of marriage. Through the cabin's lone window, she watched Emma and Thomas playing in the yard, their laughter a bitter reminder of how quickly childhood innocence could fade in the face of hardship. Emma, at 10, was already shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years, while 8-year-old Thomas tried his best to be the man of the house. The morning wind whistled through gaps in the cabin walls that William would have sealed, had pneumonia not taken him so suddenly last winter. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter, remembering how he'd promised to teach Thomas about maintaining the homestead come spring. Now spring had arrived, and with it came more challenges than she could handle alone. Their small herd of cattle had dwindled to 3 milk cows and a sickly calf. The barn roof sagged ominously, threatening to collapse with the next heavy snow. The wheat field, once their pride, lay half-planted. She simply didn't have the strength to work it all herself. Sarah had sold William's tools, then his horse, and finally her mother's silver tea service, but the money barely covered their most pressing needs. Mr. Jenkins from the bank had visited yesterday, his sympathy barely masking his businesslike demeanor. 3 months, Mrs. Collins, he'd said, shuffling papers with practiced detachment. The bank's been patient considering the circumstances, but we can't extend the mortgage any further. Sarah heated water for the morning's porridge, stretching. The last of their oats with dried apple slices. Emma came in, carrying fresh eggs from their remaining hens. "Only 3 today, Mama," she reported, her young face too serious. "But they're good ones." "That's wonderful, darling." Sarah managed to smile, though her heart ached. 3 eggs wouldn't feed 3 hungry mouths, but Emma needed praise for her diligence. "Would you fetch Thomas? Breakfast is nearly ready." As Emma went to call her brother, Sarah divided the porridge into 3 bowls, giving the children larger portions than her own. She'd learned to ignore her own hunger. A mother's sacrifice came as naturally as breathing. Thomas burst in, proudly, carrying a bundle of kindling he'd gathered. "Mama, look! I found some dry wood under the old oak tree." His eyes shone with the same determination William had always shown, making Sarah's heart clench with both pride and sorrow. "Well done, my brave boy." She ruffled his hair as he passed, noting how his shirt sleeves had grown too short. They'd need new clothes before winter, but that was a worry for another day. Over breakfast, Emma announced, "Mrs. Peterson at church said she'd pay me to help with her mending." She stirred her porridge thoughtfully. "I could go after my chores." Sarah's throat tightened. Her children shouldn't have to work for others at such young ages, but pride had no place in survival. "That's very kind of her, Emma. Just don't neglect your studies." Education was one thing Sarah refused to sacrifice. William had been so adamant about their children learning to read and cipher. After breakfast, Sarah watched her children head to the small schoolhouse a mile down the road. Their patched clothes and worn boots a testament to their poverty, but they walked tall, just as she taught them. Collins' children didn't slouch, no matter their circumstances. Alone in the quiet cabin, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness. Tears slid down her cheeks as she gripped the edge of the rough-hewn table. "Oh, William," she whispered to the empty room, "how am I supposed to do this without you?" The question echoed unanswered, as it had every day since his passing. But she had no choice but to find a way. 3 months to save their home. 3 months to perform a miracle. Sarah wiped her eyes, straightened her apron, and stepped outside to face another day of impossible choices and relentless work. Her children needed her to be strong, and strong she would remain, even if it broke her heart in the process. The storm arrived just before dusk, bringing with it a biting wind that rattled the cabin's shutters. Sarah had just finished storing the day's meager harvest, 3 turnips and a handful of winter squash, when she heard Thomas shouting from outside, "Mama! Mama! Come quick!" There was an edge to his voice she'd never heard before. Sarah grabbed her shawl, hurrying out into the growing darkness. The wind whipped her skirts as she followed Thomas's voice toward the edge of their wheat field. Emma was already there, standing rigid as a fence post, staring at something in the growing shadows. "Good Lord," Sarah breathed, crossing herself. At the sight before them, a man lay crumpled in the mud, blood darkening his expensive shirt. Beside him, a magnificent black stallion lay dead, its saddle adorned with elaborate Mexican silver spurs that glinted dully in the fading light. The man's clothes spoke of wealth, fine wool coat, leather boots that cost more than their entire harvest. But wealth meant nothing when life's blood was seeping into Montana soil. "He's still breathing, Mama," Emma whispered, her face pale in the gathering dark. "We can't leave him out here." Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. They barely had enough food for themselves, barely enough medicine, barely enough of anything. But her daughter was right. They couldn't leave him to die. "Thomas, run back and stoke the fire. Emma, help me with him." Sarah knelt in the mud, checking the man's pulse. It was there, but weak, fluttering like a trapped bird beneath his skin. The stranger groaned as they turned him over. He was a large man, solid with muscle beneath his fine clothes. Blood matted his dark hair, and more seeped from a wound in his side. His face, though lined with pain, bore the refined features of someone used to commanding respect. "What do you suppose happened to him?" Emma asked, struggling to help her mother drag the unconscious man toward their cabin. "Nothing good," Sarah replied grimly, noting the powder burns around the bullet hole in his shirt. This was no hunting accident. They managed to get him inside, though Sarah's back screamed in protest. Thomas had the fire blazing, casting worried glances at the blood they were tracking across